Today I want to talk about C++ and C# and compare and contrast. They're both good languages for object-oriented programming. C++ tends to be a little bit more low level, but faster for execution time. C# is thought of as easier to learn. Here I've got side by side a hello world program for both of those. Execution starts in main for both of these, and the big difference is in C#, everything, even main, has to be inside of a class. So I've got a hello world class. In C++, we oftentimes use classes. Classes are great. C++ supports classes, but main is not going to be inside of a class. So what else do we see here? Well, we've got a using line for both C++ and C# with namespaces. C++ needs to include this IO stream, a library for input and output. The main function returns an integer in C++, and 0 means you've had a successful execution of the function. So we've got a lowercase main for C++, uppercase main, which is a void function in C#. So that's a big difference. And how would you write hello world to the program in C++? Just cout and the insertion operator, console.write in C#. So if I hit run on both of these, I see they produce hello world. What about going to the next line afterwards? So if I have another line to write out, maybe like bye or something, they're going to be right on top of each other. I haven't done anything to go to the next line in C++, and endl will go to the next line so that hello world and bye are on separate lines. What about in the C#? Well, let me clone this line to write out to the console and put a bye. Here we're going to have these right on top of each other. To go to the next line, we can change this right to a right line. If you do not want to use the using namespace std line in C++, we can go over there and get rid of that. That just makes it very easy to use everything from the std namespace. Things like cout are actually in an std namespace, and endl. So if you want to prepend the namespace and the scope resolution operator in front of the different objects that are from that namespace, then you don't need that using namespace std line. Same thing over in C#. If we don't want this using system line, well, then we can go ahead and say system.console, and that's the only thing from this program that comes from system, but now we can run that and it still works. Here's some examples of common data types used in C++ and C# and the similarities that they both support integers, doubles, char, bool, string. There's support for shorts, longs, let's see, floats, and they both support unsigned and signed data types. So an unsigned and a signed is, do you need to have negative numbers, or is it okay for all the bits to be used for positive numbers? So if you wanted to say unsigned in C++, you'd use the unsigned word right in front of the data type. If you were in C#, you just do a u in front of it. A u int means an unsigned int. And then how about reading an input from the user? So in my C++ example, to read an input, I've got cin, so this object that reads an input from the user typing at the keyboard, and the extraction operator, the greater than sign. And you would read input in from the keyboard and store it in a variable like a string if the question is, how are you? If you want to read an input in C#, we can use console.readline, and we'll read all the way to the end of the line. So I'm going to do the C++ one first. I go ahead and run it, and it'll ask the question, how are you? And I can say, I'm doing wonderful or good, and hit enter. And then I've stored in the variable x the word good, and it prints x is equal to good. Over in C#, the same question, how are you? And I did write instead of write line, so it would match the C++ example and stay on the same line when it's waiting for the input, and I can say good. One difference here with the input is on the C# side, if I have a multi-word answer like very good, it reads in both of those with read line. Read line reads till the end of the line. With C#, the default extraction operator will stop when it hits a space. So if I say very good, it's only going to read that first word as my answer, and there is a way to fix that using a function called getLine, but it's a different function, so it doesn't work quite as easily. I think that's an example where C# is a little easier to use than C++. With strings and user input, so we asked this question, how are you? In both of those examples, you were able to concatenate one string with another with the plus sign. So we were able to say x is equal to plus, and then your data type that's also a string, that's x. So string concatenation works in both of those. What about if statements? Well, in C++ and C#, the if statements looks pretty much identical. And if what you have in the if, or else block is just a single line, you do not need curly braces. But if you're going to have more than one line, you'll put a curly brace at the beginning and then a curly brace at the end. And it's okay to have the curly braces even if you only have one line. In fact, I do it all the time in case I might want to add more lines later. But it's not required unless you've got more than one line in there. Let's look at both of these examples running. So with both of these examples, I start out with x is 10 in both the C++ and the C#, and that line looks identical. And then I have an if statement that looks identical. If x is less than 0, then we print negative number. Else if x is equal to 0, so 2 equal signs is a comparison, 1 equal sign is an assignment statement. So that's the difference between the assignment statement at the beginning and the comparison and the else if. So if it's 0, we'll print out 0, else we'll print it must have been a positive number. So it looks the same on both sides. We hit run, we get positive in both of those cases. But what if, I'm going to change my else if to say x equal to 1. And then I'm going to explain why I picked 1 later. And then we're going to say 1. I'll do that on both sides. And we'll keep x as 10. It's still a positive number, so we run it and it says positive over here, says positive over here. But what if you make a little typo and you forget to put the 2 equal signs in the comparison, which is very common to do. I see a lot of beginner students do that. And what if your intention is to say x is the same as 1, but you only put 1 equal sign there? Well, on the C#, it's not even going to compile. It's going to say that is not allowed. You can't convert in C# from an int to a bool automatically. So the if statement needs a boolean or a true or false, and this is an assignment statement, so that will not even compile. On the C++ side, not only will it compile, but you get some really crazy answers. It ends up assigning x to have the value 1, and then that's 1 is true, so it goes in and says 1, even though we had intended that our x value be 10. So in that case, I think C#'s doing the right thing and preventing people from making mistakes of using an assignment statement when they meant to do a comparison. Let's compare while statements. Identical from C++ to C#. You can do while and then some kind of Boolean expression, true or false, and you'll do a beginning curly brace and an ending curly brace. And both of these examples on the right and the left side will count down from 10 to 1. And I could run them and I can see you start out with your x being 10, that's greater than 0, so you print 10 and then a space, and then you decrease x by 1. If it's still greater than 0, you'll print out 9, 8, etc. and stop when you get to 1. Same thing over here in C#. The do while is the same. Instead of a pre-test for the beginning of the loop, you've got your post-test where you go through at least once and then you'll check, is this condition true or false? While it's true, you keep going through the loop. So these do while loops, as well as the last example, will go from 10 to 1. For loops, the same in C++ and C#. You have your starting condition that executes once to set your variable start value. While the second part is true, you keep going through the loop, and then at the end, you're going to decrease x by 1. In both of these, again, we're counting down from 10 to 1. In fact, there's so many similarities between C# and C++. The comments, you can either have a single line comment or a multi-line comment with either these two forward slashes, the forward slash and the star and forward slash. Variable names have to contain letters, numbers, and underscores, but they have to start with an underscore or a letter. If you want something to be a constant, you're going to set it once and then never change it. Put the word const in front of it. All these arithmetic operators work in C# and C++. Compound operators, where you're combining the assignment statement with the operator, the pre-increment and decrement and post-increment and decrement are all the same. All right, what about a switch case? So the switch case, you'll start with a switch on, it could be a number or a letter or word, and we're going to see, does it match any of the cases? So in my example, there's case 1, case 2, and then a default. In C++, in this example, it's not going to match case 1 or case 2, so we're going to run and print default. In C#, it looks very similar. You've got a switch and as many cases as you want and a default at the end. And normally you have a break statement at the bottom of each of these cases. But look what happens in C++ if I were to delete all these break statements or comment them out. So in C++, this will still run and maybe cause surprising examples or surprising output. For instance, if I put a number 1 there, it should match case 1. We know it'll print you picked 1. You might be surprised to see it also goes into the second case and the default. Once it finds a match, it just keeps matching everything. But in the C# example, they made it so it will not even compile if you get rid of any of the break statements. You're going to get a compilation error. So one error, it's that the error is that I removed the break statement. So I think that's smart because a lot of times when people forget the break, that's not what they intended and they're really confused about the results. All right, so other similarities, both of them have functions. C# might call them methods, but they look very similar to functions. The execution starting in lowercase main versus uppercase main, but execution starts in main. They both have polymorphic abilities, both C# and C++. They both support generic programming, exception handling. Some differences is that unlike C++, all C# methods have to be in classes. And they support arrays, some small differences. C# doesn't allow multiple inheritance. It's more like Java, whereas C++ does support multiple inheritance. The bools and the ints aren't interchangeable in C# like they are in C++. And there's no pointers in C# and no header files. And there's garbage collection, so you're not deciding when the destructors are called, so you don't have to handle the memory management yourself. All right, so we could talk about this all day, but this video is getting pretty long, so type something in the comment if you have any questions. But the moral of the story was there are a lot of similarities between C++ and C#, and if you're coming from one to the other, you're going to pick it up really quickly. All right, have a good day. Happy programming.